So let's start. This is the agenda for today. As already announced in the invitation, we have, it was quite short notice that we organized this event. As you know, it was not part of our annual planning, as of course, the events in Ukraine came in at everybody's surprise. So still, we thought as a working group focused on education in emergencies, we need to do something. This crisis is very acute, and there will be a lot of, response also needed in the education sector, both in Ukraine and the neighboring countries. So yeah, we felt somehow the need to organize something quite quickly. And I'm really glad that Corinna Borer and Wiltrud Weidinger from PHZH have agreed to present their work around the Ukraine and neighboring countries' response to us today. Also because PHZH has had a leading role in developing this digital learning platform that is now widely being used, of course. And also Noémi Krauer from World Vision, who was, on a mission in the neighboring countries at the very early stage, and will be ready to share her impressions with us today. So again, thank you very much to those two speakers. And I will also do a little input after those two inputs from Corinna, Wiltrud, and Noémi. On the different resources and coordination mechanisms that exist and are available at international level from the Global Education Cluster, etc. And also shortly on what we do as Save the Children. There will be time for questions after each input, which will last around 10 minutes, each of them, and then you can ask questions which are related to the input itself. And then we will have more time for a longer discussion at the end of this webinar, where it would be great if we can quickly do also a tour, like, where everybody who likes can also explain, what he or she or their organizations are doing with regards to the Ukraine response or what they are planning to do. And of course, like how we should continue this discussion and coordination and knowledge sharing within the RECI itself. So before we talk about the response, the education response, I thought it's still maybe good to look at the needs and the context. So just a very short slide with some facts. So Ukraine has a population of 43.5 million, thereof 5.7 million school-aged children. The enrollment rate is, or before the war, was 100%, and we also have an adult literacy rate of 100%. I think this makes it already clear that we are dealing with a very special crisis context in this case, where, of course, like the level of education has been very high before the war. Also, an interesting fact, I think, is that 89% of teachers in primary and 80% of secondary school teachers in Ukraine are female. And of course, as you know, most of these have now migrated or needed to migrate. So there is a huge lack of teachers also inside the country. We have Ukrainian refugees who crossed the border as per 11th of April, 4.5 million. Internally displaced, so still inside Ukraine, but in other regions, 7.1 million. And I'm sure these figures are already outdated and much higher by now. As per the Ministry of Education and as per April, mid of April, we had already 869 destroyed education facilities inside Ukraine. So the war doesn't hold in front of schools, unfortunately, and there will be a huge rehabilitation effort needed also to re-establish all this education infrastructure. This doesn't summarize the needs in neighboring countries so much, of course, where there is also additional needs with education systems being challenged to, integrate Ukrainian children successfully, and that also, of course, applies to the Western European countries like Switzerland and others. Okay, and with this, I would like to hand over to Noémi for some impressions from her recent visits to the border response in Moldova and Romania. Please, Noémi.
Thank you, Valeria. Thank you for this opportunity. So just to say this straight away, I won't have at all an education focus in my presentation. I've also discussed this with Valeria, but just to be clear on that on the beginning, the objective of my visit at this early stage, and I visited starting from March, the second week of March, I was in Moldova for 2.5 weeks, and it was really a scoping mission. I'll go a bit more into detail on what that exactly means for the World Vision response. But at that stage, the focus really was not on education, and I also, unfortunately, didn't get an update from our education specialist, even though I had asked for one, but everyone being so busy, I am not completely up to date on what is planned with regards to education. Just that as a thing to say in the beginning. So maybe if you can just move to the next slide. Not that I prepared a big presentation, but just to give you a bit of an idea of the visit. So World Vision has not had a very strong presence in Eastern Europe in the past decades, except for Romania, where we've had an office since the early 90s, but a very small one, not with a quite small amount of staff, but no presence in Moldova, Ukraine, Poland, or other neighboring countries of Ukraine. So on the onset of the crisis, the focus is very much on Romania because of our presence that we had there. And my task, together with 3 other members of the response, was to go to Moldova, to Chisinau, to on a scoping mission to see what are even the needs, where could be our space as World Vision in this emerging crisis, and also to see whether or not we would want to go for a registration in the country. Right now, we have recently achieved or gone for registration in Moldova, but when I was there back in March, it was really to see what can we do, with what partner, and what are the needs. And I don't know how much you individually know about Moldova, so I don't want to go. I'm sure there is a bit of knowledge about the country, so I don't want to go into a deep dive of the context. But I mean, you certainly all know that it's supposed to be one of the poorest country in Europe. It is very much an agricultural country. It's not part of the EU, and the living standard is quite low. And I just added these 2 pictures: one from a rural area, which is most of the country, and one is from the capital Chisinau, which except maybe for the very center of the city, is also is not very much of an urban space, with a population generally of the country that has been going down in the past years. So that is just to give an idea. And so what we know now is that more than 450,000 people have crossed into the country since the beginning of the conflict, and the estimates are that approximately 3/4 of this 450,000 people have transited further into the EU. However, there's still a larger amount than initially projected that are staying in the country. More than 100,000 people are staying, and reasons so what we experienced was, when we spoke to refugee families, to women, was most of them were coming from Odessa, which is, if you can just go to the next slide, just to have an idea of the geographical landscape. So Odessa is very close to cross. So many people, they just want to remain close to. Have you switched to a slide, or did I just miss it? Sorry. It seems to be frozen, maybe, but it doesn't matter. I'll just keep talking.
The second one.
Yes, the one with the map.
Sorry.
No. Yes, so there is two main border crossing. One is more in the south. It's called Palanca. It's close to Odessa, and one is more in the north. And we had the chance to visit Palanca, which is also where most people, as I said, from the southern regions are coming. And for those who are wanting to stay, they mostly stay in host families, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. And the reasons for staying is the proximity, but also very little language barriers, with most of the population being bilingual, Romanian and Russian, and also somehow a similar mentality. So and we've also seen or spoken to government or to ministry officials who were saying that it is fairly easy also to enroll the children in Russian-speaking schools. I don't know how much this has now been the case, but that was what we heard in the beginning of the crisis. What's also very interesting for this country is it's a country that has not been much of international attention at all since in the last decades. So there is a very small there was a very small landscape of professionalized NGOs, including child protection, but with very little budget, with very low amount of staff. And what we've experienced, or what we saw also as a risk, is all these huge INGOs coming with huge amounts of budget, kind of almost overrunning these smaller NGOs. And so what I've experienced, and it was unique for me. I mean, I've been personally in different humanitarian emergencies in different contexts, but it was for me the first time to be there on the very onset of a refugee response, and just to see the amount of INGOs, the amount of staff coming in day by day, the hotels filling up, and kind of almost like a playground of all the INGOs. And it really felt a bit like everyone is here and trying to get the biggest piece of the cake, and trying to, to grab those specialized NGOs and to suggest funding to them. And I guess this is also a risk. Also, what we've experienced is a big or a large culture of volunteers that is also possibly to be destroyed with now the influx of the INGOs. This is just my personal experience. Then, as I said earlier, most people are staying with host families. I think I just saw recently a figure that said only 5 to 10% are staying in refugee or transit facilities that are being run either by the government or by private institutions. But most are staying with host families that are by themselves already quite vulnerable. And this also raised some questions on how much to also support the host community in this crisis. And for example, World Vision with yes, thank you. That's a good. It's good to switch now. This is at the Palanca border crossing, the one I mentioned. I'm sure you've seen hundreds of similar looking pictures. So it's not I think something very specific for the context, but having all these camps set up there after the border with all the NGOs, and also UNICEF with the blue dots. I think it was one of the first one they established in Palanca for the whole country, and just seeing everyone being there. But the reality at this stage, at least, was that most people just wanted to go away from the immediate border as quickly as possible, and not even taking much advantage of the services that had been put in place. So so just to go back to the host family, for example, World Vision has now launched, funded by WFP, a project to support host families that are hosting a minimum of 2 refugees for at least 1 month. It's a one-off payment, multi-purpose cash payment targeting 7,000 households. And I think such initiatives are frequent and also in other countries. So maybe just to wrap up, maybe the switch, if you can go to the next slide. And I won't go much into detail, but just to give you an overview, because now I spoke about Moldova, but World Vision's Ukraine crisis response is focused on 4 countries. As I said in the beginning, initially we were not present neither in Ukraine nor in Moldova, and now we have registration for Moldova, plus for the 2 western regions, Chernivtsi and Lviv in Ukraine where we can directly implement, plus partnering approach, of course, for other parts of the country. And additionally, we have a smaller project in Georgia that is building on our pre-existing long-standing presence in the country. And just for the objectives, first of all, the first objective is focusing on basic needs. I won't go into detail because I'm sure it's similar to other organizations as well. Then building protective environment, and objective number 3 is to facilitate access to information, education, healthcare, and social protection. And one part of this objective is to build child-friendly spaces that have an included temporary learning spaces. And this is something that is being built up. And as I said in the beginning, unfortunately, I don't have much updated information on that because now I'm back to my role in World Vision Switzerland, and I am not involved in the response anymore. Now we're just back to the funding or support office, as we call it, role, and that gives a bit of distance again from the response. But I still hope that this was somehow interesting to you, to get an impression on how it looked like to be there on the very onset of the response.
I think that's a good bridge to the input from PH Zürich, which will now dig a bit deeper into those like education-related questions, and also of how to best support, Ukrainian refugees in their integration in schools in neighboring countries or also Western Europe. So just trying to get the slides up. Here we go. Over to you, Corinna and Wiltrud.
So we don't know best how to support, but I want to give an overview of what we have done in the past weeks. So since we are state institutions, we are with a focus on the teacher training, and EiE, the International Projects for Education Department, is part of this institution. We had to orient ourselves internally in the first days after the war started and coordinate how we communicate. And here we have divided this overview with a view into the activities in our international projects and a second view into the university, as here there are also materials or inputs that could be valuable for the network. And we have prepared this as a handout and will be happy to share this afterwards as PDF. And this gives a rough overview and hopefully contains useful links of presentations, materials, and platforms that are available. We as EiE, we had a mandate from SDC in Ukraine since 10 years, which is in the peace and governments domain. And back in 2014, we were very close to the beginning of this conflict and were aware of this risk for Ukraine, also not as much as the staff on the ground. And needless to say that none of our staff or we expected such a war, which also Valentina, who is working with us for more than 10 years now, made clear to me again last Friday when I talked to her. In the first 10 days of this war, nobody knew exactly where we should help, or most of us from the staff from the EiE focused on help mainly in private activities. And then as more and more refugees arrived in the neighboring countries, the Ministry of Education in Moldova approached us within the framework of our ongoing project Jobs Moldova and Personal Development and asked for support. We are cooperating with the ministry as the state university since 2015. And we were many times there, and we have pilot schools there, we have partners, NGOs there. And the first thing which we did in this response was that Mrs. Weidinger Wiltrud gave a webinar for trainers and teachers on how to talk to children about the war. And we then discussed further with the ministry on topics that would support them. And I was there on Christmas, Orthodox Christmas, Eastern Christmas, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. And we discussed this at the ministry again. And the ministries gave us statistics, which is also a little link to the presentation before, that show that only about 13% of the refugee children for preschool and school age have been enrolled in the school. And of these 13%, 90% are in Russian-speaking schools and only 10% are in Romanian-speaking schools. This is also because the majority of Moldovan, they also gave them shelter now. They speak Russian. They have very mixed families always, and they also said that it's easier, as it was said before, it's easier to enroll them in the Russian-speaking schools. The majority of the children are in grade 2 to 3, and the rest are relatively even distributed across grades 1 and then 4 to 9. And as we discussed, or I discussed with the ministry 2 weeks ago, the help is very limited because we cannot reach most of the children. The children are further or educated online by Ukrainian teachers or by their parents, and many are accommodated in privately. In the schools I visited myself, and these are pilot schools from our projects in Belz in the north, in Orhei and in Chisinau, there were no refugee children registered. Also, many are privately accommodated in these places also. And to help the children, and especially the teachers, to support them, we have taken the needs from the ministry and the schools. And based on this, we proposed, the proposal was to give a webinar for the school administrators so that they have a kind of like checklist of what they need to think of or how they can act. Because we heard also examples of children, they wanted to go to the schools, but then the principal didn't know how to register them and how to deal with the situation, and they sent them back. This was one proposal we made for the school managers. And on the other hand, we will now develop also additional teaching tasks in frame of the subject personal development on how to deal with fake news. Because there are a lot of, and everybody heard that there are a lot of news in Moldova that foster a little this, this anti-refugee thinking. Like they don't want to have them for a long time, or they infiltrate the schools and take over Moldova, and something like this is. There are rumors around this. And the ministry wanted to have help about this fake news. And we had proposed to give a sensibilization seminar for teachers using the Essence of Learning approach. And this is the link to what has been just said by Beatrice about sensibilization of the teachers to take a little the pressure of them to run through the curricula, and they want to make them learn, but they can't learn. The pupils are not able to learn something now. And I think Beatrice we can discuss this later, I think, together. However, when I had this meeting with the ministry, it became clear to me that they are very cautious and they are very not very initiative in this. This can have several reasons. On one hand, they themselves say that there are too few pupils in the schools at the moment, and they don't have really the overview where they are enrolled. And on the other hand, they don't want or can't expose themselves too much because of the unstable situation in Moldova. And this is very present when you are there. You have, like, everybody is afraid of the next step, which from the Russian side. And they can only do the most necessary. This was from the official side, my impression. We also proposed to Moldova and also to Romania the introduced Ukrainian learning platform to use this in the classroom or for the teachers. But there was almost no reaction to that, because they don't want to do too much. And in Romania, we didn't have any response to this from the Ministry of Education. And in Ukraine itself, we are supporting colleagues more on the personal level. We are in touch with them almost every day. They are still in Kiev, part of the staff we have there, and or colleagues, and some they flee to Lviv. And we help them with donations. We had a charity event at the university, and we donated the money collected from the staff of the PH and the students. We donated to the NGO, to the staff of the NGO Doku, because they are now more into in the humanitarian aid, and they want to help the students or the pupils around Lviv in this area with some school materials or games that are needed. And this is what they are doing right now in Lviv. And we adapt the currently running project activities within the project Decentralization for Improved Democratic Education, DECIDE, which is financed by STC still. This the platform we also presented in Switzerland, and this was a very positive response. And the online platform that was established in Ukraine and is used now widely from the grade 5 to 9 is a learning platform which was developed in frame of the new Ukrainian school reform and due to the high demand during the pandemic. The Ministry of Education responded to this situation with a digital platform to continue the teaching of the pupils in this large country when schools were closed. And our project partners, the NGO Doku, Doku is Development of Citizenship Competences, which was founded in the project of the same name in 2016, are very strongly involved in the reform processes. They are still in touch, very close in touch with the ministry, with the Ministry of Education in Ukraine, and have contributed to this. And on this, like from our part, from the university, we have provided feedback to the platform, incorporated experiences on how to deliver, for instance, task-based or formative learning online, and what additional materials can be added to the platform to facilitate also the access for different stakeholders, not only for teachers. And the platform has been co-financed by various donors, including the DECIDE project and STC, and the NGO itself. The platform itself, and there are links in there. The platform itself is very easy to use and explains very clearly for teachers how to use it. And the materials should be now expanded also over the grades beyond grade 5 to 9. And they want to also expand this to primary level and also to other subjects, as I was informed last week. And I would like to hand over now to Wiltrud, because she would give an insight into the PH internal activities. And this could be, I think, useful also for the network. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corinna. Hello also from my side to this presentation. We faced two big challenges when we thought about all the activities that we would like to plan within our university. And we targeted two big groups with all these activities. The first group are the Swiss teachers and Swiss school principals in delivering information to them, in delivering information on how to deal with the situation in terms of organization, as a school principal, for example, how to deal with refugee children, how to organize this, how to form classes, how to prepare teachers, and so on. So this was one offer, a webinar or actually several webinars for delivering information to school principals, as well as information materials, as checklists and so on. Second group was the teachers, who were occupied with the question of how to deal with the situation in the classroom with their Swiss school children, how to talk to children about war, but also how to establish mechanisms or procedures and how to integrate refugee children in their classes, apart from subject-related questions such as the German language and so on. So we provided trainings and still are providing trainings for different age groups also. We had a big demand mentioned by teachers of kindergarten and lower primary school on how to integrate these children. And the second group, the second big group, are the teachers or people who speak Ukrainian, who are either in Switzerland and offer their expertise and their competences as school assistants in the Swiss schools, or who are Ukrainian refugees who are qualified teachers or have experience as teachers and are also applying for example, being teachers in Swiss schools, assistant teachers. We know the situation a little bit because the Zürich University of Teacher Education also trains teachers who teach in the framework of HSK, which is the heritage language teaching, coming from other different cultures and preparing them. So our role is also to prepare these teachers with information on the school system, on school organization, on the main or the major didactical approaches, for example, that are used in primary and lower primary school grades. So we served this, and the trainings for these Ukrainian teachers are free of charge. They're offered several times at our university. Here, face-to-face trainings. We also thought of reshaping existing programs in the framework of the situation. The Zurich University of Teacher Education offers, for example, an online summer school program for national and international students, but also NGO partners in our countries. It's usually a 2-week program. We now divided this and we dedicated the second week of this online summer school program to the crisis in Ukraine, focusing on the question of inclusive education. This program has been sent out to all our partners, partners in the regions who face challenges, who work together with NGOs or who are from NGOs or are teachers, can attend this program for free. And also it is open for international and national students. Apart from this, we translated a series of materials also in Ukrainian language, or are in the process of translating this in Ukrainian, mainly also language-based materials, for example, a glossary of most important school-related terms that we also got as a demand from the teachers in the schools. So I think most of our activities have been shaped by also the demands that were that we heard from either lecturers who work in schools, mentors who visit the schools, but also people that we work with who are teachers in the canton of Zurich or in other cantons. All our materials and all our offers, trainings, also support hotlines in terms of very individual problems, for example, or challenges. You can see on this PDF that we're going to share with the links also. Maybe you can use some. Everything is listed on this website, phzh.ch/Ukraine. And yes, we keep updating this website. We have received a lot of feedback also from teachers, from school principals, and we will see how we can, adapt all these programs or materials in the course of the development of this crisis. One of the biggest challenges in a big institution like ours was coordinating all these activities together, trying to bring together something like a task force or a group of people who are experts on the question of migration, on didactics, on integration, inclusion, and bring this together. And the same accounts for questions that come from, that are addressed to us from the media. So we always have to act very fast, which is not naturally in the culture of a big institution. So this was also our challenge internally. But we hope that we can use a lot of the things. Now, the platform that Corinna has mentioned before, the all Ukrainian platform with all the materials and videos in Ukrainian is used, has had big echo also here. And now materials and also videos are being produced by all our Ukrainian colleagues also for the lower grades, because originally these materials were developed for 5th grade and onwards, and now also the lower grades are being developed. Yeah. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you both, Corinna and Wiltrud, for sharing these interesting insights. And I find it quite impressive how you managed to mobilize your existing resources and expertise as a pedagogical university to really respond very flexibly and very effectful to those needs. So this is to shortly show you a few resources and explain the different coordination mechanisms in this education response, which I'm sure some of you have already heard of or are aware of. So in terms of humanitarian coordination mechanisms for education, I think it's important to understand that there is a big difference between the context inside Ukraine, where, obviously this is an acute humanitarian crisis. So United Nations has activated the different clusters, in order to coordinate the different response mechanisms across the different sectors. And that also is true for education, which also at global level, UNICEF and Save the Children are co-leading on the education cluster. And that's also the case here for the Ukraine education cluster. Then there is, in the neighboring countries, there is unfortunately, as I said before, no standardized coordination mechanisms for education. There is UNHCR, as you know, who coordinates the overall humanitarian response, but that's across all sectors and not specifically for education. I know that in some countries, of course, we have education sector groups existing prior to the crisis. And UNICEF is also very much supporting, these mechanisms, but these are not uniform, and it's, it's a bit ad hoc in every country, how to coordinate around education, which of course poses a lot of challenges with regards to speaking to the Ministry of Education in a uniform voice, with regards to, avoiding duplication of the different humanitarian actors' work, etc., etc. So I think best is if you operate in a specific neighboring country to investigate with UNHCR, what are the existing education coordination mechanisms and how you can join these. Either UNHCR or UNICEF will be able to give you a response. So maybe quickly about the Ukraine education cluster, which was not new. It was activated already in the crisis in 2014 in Ukraine, but for Donbas region only. So now, of course, it's been extended or reactivated to serve as a countrywide coordination mechanism. And the purpose is really to facilitate the coordination among the different humanitarian actors and with the government, also sharing of knowledge, best practices, tools, etc. They do joint needs assessments, which can be used as a basis, for evidence for all actors, and also assessing the needs and the demand. And of course, joint advocacy for humanitarian action. Members are local and international NGOs, UN agencies, international organizations, and the Ministry of Education in Ukraine. There is weekly coordination mechanisms every Friday, which are open for anybody to join. Also, there is, a mailing list where you can get weekly updates, including the minutes from these coordination minutes. meetings. And yeah, you can, when you have the presentation, which I will share later, you can click on these links to sign up and see these resources. Also some key resources and links. So there's the education cluster website for Ukraine, which also includes some resources which are available in Ukrainian and Russian and can be used for education programming. Also, EiE has set up a dedicated page for the Ukraine education response, where they include, you know, all the resources that have been translated into Ukrainian and Russian and can be useful for the response. Then, you know, for the refugee response, there is the UNHCR website, as I said before, which also includes data and statistics, including for education. And if you want to know more, or if you work with local partners, like for instance for Ukraine, and you want to inform them about the education cluster and how they can join, there's a very useful document which explains in a very simple language, like how the cluster system works and what is the added value of joining the clusters. It's also available in Russian and Ukrainian for local partners, and you can click on this last link to access it. So just very quickly also about what Save the Children is doing. So in Ukraine, we have a presence since 2014. And the humanitarian response currently, which is mainly delivered through local partners. It includes all the usual topics such as cash and voucher assistance, MHPSS support, food, hygiene, shelter, education, child protection, non-food items, psychological first aid, etc., etc. For education, what we are doing so far, it's mainly distribution of learning kits, either for distance learning at home or for, schools that are hosting large numbers of IDPs inside Ukraine and that need additional materials. Also, we are setting up digital learning spaces, which allow children, to access the online learning content more easily and also to have support there in the centers directly. And of course, as we always do in our education and emergencies response, we have a strong emphasis on including mental health and psychosocial support activities at schools. Then for the refugee response, we mainly work in Poland, Romania, Lithuania, and the different countries in Western Europe. Where also we have provided child-friendly spaces in the reception centers, which are providing social, recreational, but also educational activities, MHPSS, child protection services, especially for unaccompanied and separated children which arrive in the neighboring countries, etc., etc. For education in the neighboring countries, we are supporting catch-up classes and summer camp activities, which are upcoming, also especially on mental health and psychosocial support inputs. Also, we are setting up these digital learning hubs in some of the neighboring countries, and we provide learning kits to refugees. We are also active in Switzerland as Save the Children Switzerland, supporting Ukrainian refugee families which arrive here. We have, for example, provided family kits which include learning and play materials and also like stress reduction exercises, etc. And our kind of more like on the advisory services level, our colleagues from the national programs team, they provide support to temporary shelters and host families on child protection issues, which are quite, an issue, of course, in these centers and often a bit like forgotten. So our team is providing training to shelter staff and organizations that support host families on how to better, be aware of child protection issues. our support in education in Switzerland is not very strong. So because there, I mean, we have, we rely on other, organizations who already do that. So we don't see really much added value, but we also share resources with families and links, etc., with those families that we work with, and we try to include like existing support services there so that they can also be better informed how to access education related services.